I got a comment from someone on the last video asking if I could explain science to an Australian senator, and this link.
Look, I'd like to get some evidence in relation to the greenhouse gas effect.
Politician asking for evidence of a scientific conclusion that's been established and confirmed for over 200 years. Straight away I knew this is not going to end well. But then I got another post about the same guy, this time from someone who believed that what the senator said was food for thought. So I ploughed on.
First law of thermodynamics, or the equivalent of third law of Newton's law of motion: for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So assuming carbon dioxide, and it's not, but assuming it's the same weight as N2O2, how can one atom of CO2 heat up 10,000 other atoms of N2O2 through conduction? Unless it itself is around somewhere between 10,000 degrees to do that.
Now, if you didn't study science past 9th grade and never understood thermodynamics, you may be wondering, what's Rennick on about? But if you studied physics up to postgraduate level, you'll be thinking, what is Rennick on about? He's using a lot of science words, but he's jumbling them up in a way that makes no sense. Not only that, there are some real 5th grade errors here. These elementary mistakes may not mean very much to a lot of people, but to anyone who's actually studied physics or chemistry, it's a clear sign that he didn't. To be honest, he looks and sounds more like a tax accountant.
Now, Mr. Rennick is an accountant who has a master's in taxation law.
Okay, well, that explains that one. Most importantly, he's explaining this convoluted version of thermodynamics to the government's chief scientist, who happens to be a physicist, and he's telling her that one atom can only heat up other atoms through what he calls conduction, I think he means convection, if it's
somewhere between 10,000 degrees.
It's hardly surprising that she couldn't make head or tail of what he was saying.
Thank you, Senator Rennick, for that question.
I'll unravel Rennick's special brand of physics later, because he encapsulates the problem of so many people who think scientists are in a conspiracy to hide real physics that only they understand. And believe me, Rennick's ideas get even funnier. And I'll show a simple classroom experiment, so the next time your tax accountant tells you he's discovered a flaw that no one else has spotted in 200 years, you'll be able to point him in the direction of how physics works in the real world. You're probably thinking, thank God Senator Rennick only humiliated himself once at that one Senate hearing, and there's no video of another Senate hearing where he asks even dumber questions to a different scientist, which of course is a setup to play a clip of him doing just that.
The gas is trap convection, because I find it confusing that we use this greenhouse gas term when a greenhouse is a solid glass object. And I was taught in grade 8 science that basically materials come in three forms: liquid, gas and solid objects, and I didn't know that gases could trap convection in the same way that a greenhouse would trap rising air, cool and then condense. I don't see how gases can do that.
Yeah, so I think we talked about this before.
Ah, yes, this is so much the look I got from my old chemistry teacher when I asked him a dumb question. I think we've been through this before, Hadfield, he used to say, which is code for I sat down with you for 2 hours last term explaining all this one-on-one and you're back asking the same dumb question. Are you sure you wouldn't rather switch to tax accounting? It seems Australia's chief scientist has also given Rennick remedial lessons one-on-one.
I think this is something we covered actually 3 years ago when I went and visited you.
The other exasperated scientist is Dr. Larry Marshall, the head of Australia's science agency, the CSIRO. Dr. Marshall isn't stumped by this aspect of physics, he just has no idea what Rennick's on about, and it gets worse.
Do gases trap convection? I just wanted an answer. Does gas trap convection?
So do gases trap convection?
Maybe if I can...
Yep, that's the chemistry teacher look.
Does gas trap convection or not?
But we know from temperature measurements going back a very long time that the Earth is about 16 degrees warmer because of the residual greenhouse gases, CO2 mostly.
Or gravity.
In the atmosphere.
Or gravity.
This could very well be the stupidest person on the face of the Earth.
So I'm not sure I understand your point there.
Well, gravity, anyway, I know you don't think gravity has a part of it, and we'll take that up another day, but that's fine.
No, please, let's take it up now. Rennick is so proud of his idea that gravity plays a role in global warming, he's called it a fact and made it a headline on his website. and lambasted scientists for ignoring his unique discovery. Now, believe it or not, I think I figured out what Rennick's on about. But in order to unpick the jerry-rigged muddle of ideas he's built for himself and millions of voters, I had to go to a very scary place. I had to delve deeply into Gerard Rennick's brain.
You're traveling through another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
So here it is again, Gerard Rennick's brain, and this is what it came up with. We'll start with the second one.
Do gases trap convection?
Or, as Dr. Marshall put it,
So do gases trap convection?
Now, convection is one of the methods by which gases and liquids transfer heat. So convection is a property of gases, which means it can't be trapped by them. It's like asking, can rainbows trap light, or can flames trap heat? So what is it he doesn't understand? Well, of course, I can't really see into Rennick's brain, but it is possible to follow his train of thought based on what he's written. On his website, he says, climate scientists argue that CO2 traps heat in the same way that a greenhouse traps heat. Well, I've never heard a scientist argue that, and of course Rennick can't cite a single example. What they do say, as NASA says on its website, is that the two processes are similar. The term greenhouse gas was coined in 1901 to describe how certain gases in the atmosphere allow shortwave radiation from the sun to pass through to the ground, but absorb heat going back the other way, that would otherwise escape. The glass of the greenhouse does the same thing, but by different means. So greenhouse gases are stopping heat from escaping and causing warming, not in the same way as a greenhouse, but like a greenhouse. We call this an analogy. For example, when Madonna sang the song Like a Virgin, it doesn't mean she was a virgin. Back in 1984, none of us were putting any money on that. It's an analogy, like a virgin, but clearly not. So I began to wonder, does Rennick not understand what an analogy is? Does he think science is wrong because carbon dioxide is a gas and a greenhouse is a solid? Surely not.
The idea that gas is a greenhouse is compared to CO2 is compared to a greenhouse. CO2 is a gas, a greenhouse is a solid. That doesn't stand up. A greenhouse is a solid glass object, and I didn't know that gases could trap convection in the same way that a greenhouse would trap rising air, cool, and then condense. I don't see how gases can do that.
Oh God, yes he does. He really thinks carbon dioxide can't be a greenhouse gas because greenhouses are solid. And if you're imagining the kind of response Dr. Marshall then gives to such mind-numbing, face-palming asininity, you're right.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about this before.
Yep, that's the look. And I'm not surprised Dr. Marshall says this has been explained to Rennick before, but you can see why it doesn't get through. So let's dive back into Rennick's brain and see the problem through his eyes. He's learned that greenhouses heat up because sunlight passes through the glass, warms the air inside, and then most of the heat can't escape. If you smashed all the glass, of course, the warm air inside would mix with the cold air outside and transfer all that heat through convection. But the glass prevents that from happening. So the glass is trapping the warm air inside by stopping convection. Aha! In Rennick's mind, trapping air by stopping convection then becomes trapping convection. And that, I think, explains his dumb question.
Does gas trap convection or not?
Rennick believes that since scientists call these gases greenhouse gases, and the scientific theory is that they're behaving literally the exact same way as a greenhouse, scientists must believe, in Rennick's mind, that they're a solid physical barrier stopping the gases in the atmosphere spreading heat to the imaginary air in outer space through convection. Trapping convection, as he puts it. And he genuinely thinks he can debunk this theory by pointing out, brilliantly, that these gases can't trap convection because in fact they aren't solid like a greenhouse. So, if there are any followers of the senator who think he's just overturned a century of science by misunderstanding an analogy, Let me just add that noble gases aren't really noble. Queen Latifah isn't the ruler of a country. Dr. Dre can't treat your skin rash. And I know this will come as a shock, but Madonna isn't really a virgin, if you hadn't already figured that out. But that doesn't explain Rennick's belief that gravity plays a role in global warming. Where does that come from? Again, there's a clue in his website, which starts with the obvious point that without gravity there'd be no atmosphere. Okay, true, that explains why the Earth is warm, but gravity remains constant, so it doesn't explain why the Earth warms up or cools down. Then comes Rennick's belief that greenhouse gas theory says gases in the atmosphere trap heat in exactly the same way as a greenhouse, and he thinks convection is the process by which heat is carried away from the Earth. Okay, let me explain again. Heat can only be carried away by convection in gases when warmer gas molecules mix with colder gas molecules. That way, energy is transferred. The Earth can't possibly lose heat by convection unless Rennick believes outer space is full of air, or if he thinks maybe scientists believe that. The Earth, as scientists frequently explain, loses heat through radiation. But from this misunderstanding, we can now see why Rennick thinks gravity causes warming. If you like, it traps the atmosphere, and along with it, everything in the atmosphere, including convection. So you could say that gravity also traps clouds and sunsets and rainbows. But most importantly, Rennick thinks gravity stops the heat from escaping because, as he sees it, the Earth loses heat by convection, and gravity traps the convection and confines it to our atmosphere. My apologies to all the physicists out there who are probably crying. The problem is that if there really is air in outer space, okay, there isn't, but let's go with it. And if the Earth really does lose heat by convection, and if gravity really is preventing this by trapping convection, then as heat pours into the atmosphere from the sun, the Earth has no way of losing that heat. Over millions of years, it would just get hotter and hotter. So, unfortunately, the senator's idea fails as soon as it collides with reality. By the way, if anyone has any better insight into Rennick's thinking, feel free to post it. I'm just reading what he wrote and having a stab at what he's on about. Finally, we come to his idea that CO2 has to be at a temperature of between 10,000 degrees. Yes, he really did say that.
Somewhere between 10,000 degrees.
In order to transfer heat to the rest of the atmosphere. He understands the scientific principle that CO2 absorbs long-wave radiation, which is essentially heat energy, and he thinks this gives the molecule its temperature. And then this temperature has to be shared between 10,000 other molecules of nitrogen and oxygen. So, one CO2 molecule has to be at least 10,000 degrees centigrade in order to heat up the other 10,000 molecules to 1 degree centigrade. Get it? And that, he says, is impossible. Well, his first error is in thinking that individual molecules have a temperature. They don't. They transfer energy by essentially bumping into other gas molecules. For the moment, we'll leave out radiation and just go with Rennick's idea that this is all done through convection. Secondly, the ratio isn't 1 to 10,000 because water vapor and methane are also powerful greenhouse gases. And water vapor is far more abundant than CO2, so the ratio of greenhouse gases to other molecules is closer to 1 to 24. One molecule of greenhouse gas has to transfer its energy to 24 other gas molecules, not 10,000. So now that we've got the physics straightened out, sort of, is this transfer of energy impossible without heating up CO2 molecules to thousands of degrees? Well, clearly not, because it can be done in a classroom, using nothing more than warm lights. You shine them on two glass containers, one with a much higher concentration of CO2 than the other, and the one with the higher concentration warms up more quickly. This experiment was first done about 200 years ago, and these days even fifth graders can do it and understand the principle behind it. This is the phenomenon Rennick thinks is impossible. So why, again, doesn't Rennick's imagination match reality? Put simply, it's because each molecule of greenhouse gas doesn't get just one photon. Greenhouse gases are continually absorbing long-wave radiation and then passing it on through convection, and then gaining more energy by absorbing more long-wave radiation, and so on. It's a continual process. What about the first law of thermodynamics, or Newton's third law of motion, equal and opposite and all that? Well, they've got nothing to do with Rennick's new version of physics. They're all perfectly compatible with these simple experiments, and I'm guessing he just put them into his speech to impress voters, because they make it sound like Rennick's talking science, and the people who vote for him don't know any different. But that's just opinion, so let's go into the opinion room for more. Now, here's one of the predictable posts I'm going to get in the comments section, and if this is what you post, then you already agree that Rennick's beliefs are nonsense, you just don't think he deserves to be mocked for it. Here's the thing, I don't have a problem with people forgetting what they learned in junior high school. If you didn't study science past the age of 15, you've probably forgotten that CO2 is a molecule, not an atom, and you might get confused between convection and conduction. That doesn't make you stupid, so that's not the issue. The issue is that no one forces Rennick to make up his own science and then promote it in a public forum, especially a legislative chamber. That's why we have scientific institutes and universities and research publications and government chief scientists. In fact, the National Academy of Sciences in the United States was formed specifically to advise politicians on scientific issues of which they were otherwise clueless. So, if Rennick expounds laughably dumb beliefs and tries to use them to enact laws and raise taxes, he really only has himself to blame if people mock him for it. Dumbness is not ignorance of science, but an inability to understand your own limitations. This would never happen in the commercial world. Imagine if Darren Woods, the CEO of ExxonMobil, had trouble understanding how geologists concluded that oil was formed under the ancient Tethys Sea and why it's found in Cenozoic sediments. But instead of simply accepting that he doesn't understand it and doesn't need to, let's say Woods starts making up his own version of geology, he decides that oil comes from metamorphic rocks and redirects funds to drilling into orogenic belts made of marble and porphyry. He'd very quickly be booted out by shareholders who also don't understand why oil is found in Cenozoic Tethyan rocks and don't care. They just accept that geologists know geology and Woods doesn't. The problem in the world of politics is that dumb politicians don't get booted out, they get re-elected. His followers are equally convinced that gravity causes global warming. This is what policy making has come to in the 21st century. Now, I'm sure a lot of people will say, but Potholer, you're an Australian too. Aren't you embarrassed by having someone this dumb be a product of your beautiful country? And I say, steady on, I live in New South Wales, and Rennick is from Queensland. Different thing altogether. So they have to take responsibility for him, and not us. It's an Aussie thing, you have to look it up. And, of course, the post that says, so, you think you're smart? Clever. No, I came bottom of my class at school. So I know my limitations, and that's precisely why I wouldn't try to make up my own facts and lecture the chief government scientist on a subject I clearly don't understand. If I became a senator, how dumb would I have to be to tell Gerard Rennick that according to standard tax accounting practice, the way to solve inflation is to print more money so we'd all be rich? And worse still, vote in the Senate to see that done. It's not ignorance that makes us dumb. We can't be experts in everything. It's a narcissistic inability to understand our own limitations. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which I'm going to look at in another video. But does that make him the dumbest politician in Australia? Well, there's a lot of stiff competition, but you tell me.